Hi, I'm Keith Hernandez, co-founder of Changeup, and you are listening to The Changeup. Each episode, we sit down with leaders, innovators, and entrepreneurs to learn about that big career switch. From high-rising employee at a large company to taking the leap and starting your own thing. It's about the excitement of taking risks, following your passion, and building something new. This week, we have Bo Han, CEO and founder of Buzzer. Buzzer provides live sports, real-time notifications, personalized to your preferences. All right, and today's guest is Bo Han, CEO and founder of Buzzer. Bo, welcome, man.
Good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Excited to have you, man. So before we jump into your career and kind of how you got to Buzzer, I'd love to learn a little bit about what Buzzer is. Can you tell our audience what Buzzer is all about?
Yeah, we'll dive into this deeper, but Buzzer is the last mile technology connecting fans to live and ephemeral moments in sports.
I love it. And
we can dive a little bit deeper.
Yeah, we can definitely dive a little bit deeper. And, you know, what I love about Buzzer and why I'm so bullish on it, I've been like very vocal about why I'm bullish on it is, you know, I have a 5-year-old at home and it's much harder for me, you know, pre-5-year-old, pre-marriage. It was really easy to sit down all day Sunday and watch football or all day Thursday night and watch the East Coast and the West Coast games on basketball. But it's harder to find those moments now. And it's just really exciting to see something like this come out. Walk me through, you know, how you came about this idea. What made you think that the world needed Buzzer?
Yeah, that's a great question. The idea of Buzzer came to me during my time at Twitter. I was very fortunate enough to spend 7 years at Twitter. I've grown tremendously, really fostered my network, and Twitter really gave me a platform to really build relationships, not only within the technology industry, but specifically within sports. Back in 2016, we had the opportunity to bid on 10 Thursday night football games in the NFL. And that started a very prolific 4 years of my career. I'm working on content acquisition, specifically focusing on sports and later entertainment rights. The idea of Buzzer came about because what Twitter does incredibly well is that Twitter is that live second screen experience. As our friend TJ, the head of sports over at Twitter, says, that Twitter is the world's biggest sports bar. And I agree, right? And last night, you know, the Suns Lakers game, not as close as we all expected it to be, but let's take the Hawks Knicks series, right? Electric in Madison Square Garden, which is incredible to see after long waiting, right? But you would hear that roar of the crowd on Twitter. And I've always wondered, that is great if you're watching the game, but what if you're not? What if you can't? What if you're in this sports bar,
right? You
can't see the TV, right? What is the fix there, right? And so day in and day out, when something exciting happens live on television, specifically within live sports, you'll hear about it on Twitter. And if you're watching the game, great. That's what we call NBA Twitter, right? There's an incredibly engaged subculture within Twitter called NBA Twitter. But if you're not, you have this overwhelming emotional trigger of where's the nearest TV or sports bar? What channel is it on? What subscription is it part of? What time is it playing? And so, you know, as I opened up with Buzzer being that last mile tech, you know, these moments are fleeting and ephemeral. And so I've always thought about a product of how do we utilize technology to quickly connect fans to live content that they care about the most. Because I had a front row seat into once that moment is gone or once that moment is done, it's a clip on Twitter.
Yeah.
It's a clip on Instagram. And we know that we see that clip over and over again. And so how do we capture an incremental audience before it becomes a highlight or clip on Twitter?
I love that so much. Now, there was some ruminations from some of the big sports players that something like this could come about. Why do you think an ESPN or a Turner Sports wasn't able to create something like this? Why did it have to be a startup that kind of pushed the envelope?
Yeah, respectfully speaking, because, you know, I would love to work with an ESPN or a Turner, right? Sure. But I do think that our superpower is inadvertently we're neutral. You know, ESPN and Turner will always optimize for games on ESPN and Turner. Our angle and our approach is, what if we optimize for the sports fan and then direct folks to ESPN or Turner if they are interested. And so I do think that it's incredibly important to be neutral, to optimize the experience around a user and their interests. As we see the proliferation of SVODs that are happening, right? We have Peacock, we have ESPN Plus, we have Paramount Plus. For a consumer, there's just so many choices, right? So many subscriptions. And so for myself and my team, we're always thinking about how do we complement the ecosystem that is very much subscription driven. We are living in an economy where everyone is competing for attention span, for attention. As I mentioned before, these are live and ephemeral moments, but also happens to be one of the most exciting moments of the game.
Absolutely.
i.e. the most marketable parts of the game, right? And so, we started to think about how do we take these live, fleeting, yet most marketable moments and monetize that moment, but also create a essential lead gen for a lot of the SVOD platforms, whether it be ESPN or Turner or a Peacock, where over time, hopefully we could justify the economics of a reoccurring subscription by really educating users of how much those subscriptions could be very practical.
That's fantastic, man. So walk me through, if you're a casual user, right? Like you and I are steeped in tech and advertising world, but if you're a casual user, you're a Knicks fan, and you download Buzzer, what happens?
Buzzer has 3 products to start. The first product is micropayments. Just simply means pay for content that you want to watch and what you want to watch. We find that the current marketplace, as I mentioned, is incredibly crowded with subscription products. So the last thing we want to do is push out another subscription product in a market where consumers are tending to feel a little bit fatigued by subscription products because there's just so much of it. Second, as you asked, is interest-based, hyper-personalized mobile notifications. And this is part of our onboarding process. As you sign up for Buzzer, we'll ask you what you're interested in, and we'll let you know when those interesting moments happen. And for Gen Z and younger millennials, as well as casual fans, it's very different from someone who would download an ESPN or an NFL or an NBA app. These are very casual sports fans. And so really understanding what they're interested in and really surrounding that interest graph with different vectors is incredibly important. And so in the upcoming months, we'll start to integrate social platforms, meaning connect your Twitter account, and based off of who you follow, will trigger alerts for you, right?
Yep.
Or you can go in and explicitly express interest and say, hey, I'm Keith. I'm interested in NFL, NBA, NHL, MLB. Here are my teams. I know you're a big Mets fan, so only alert me when big things happen with the Mets, although you probably are watching the game. But on top of that, you have 2 kids, right? So we will have to kind of trigger alerts for you, even if you're very leaned into the Mets, right? And then also surrounding other experiences, right? And how do we connect with fantasy platforms, betting platforms, right? And then lastly, as I mentioned before, is we want to complement the subscription market, right? And so we're building a unified authentication product. And what that just simply means is you tell us what you currently subscribe to and authenticate those services with us. And if the live look-in falls within the rights that you already paid for via your cable subscription or your other SVOD or OTT subscription, it's free. If it falls outside of that subscription, then you pay the micropayment, right? And so this is to really ensure that the audience that we are addressing is net new, incremental audience, as well as giving a rights holder a new and innovative way to monetize these moments without really kind of actively eating away to the subscription market.
That's fantastic. So I want to get back to that moment that you came up with this idea, right? Was it one of those like aha moments, or did it take you a lot of noodling and prodding? Did you share it with anybody else to kind of test it out? I'd love to kind of hear how you got to idea to, okay, I'm actually going to be leaving Twitter, a really amazing role at Twitter where you get to talk to all the big sports teams and take this massive leap and this jump into being an entrepreneur. Yeah.
I mean, it's no secret that being an entrepreneur is a very scary job. I didn't know how much I was insecure about myself until I made that leap. And to the point to your question about, was it an aha moment? Referencing back to 2016, he acquired the rights to 10 NFL games. And the next year, or the next 3 years and beyond, Amazon picked those up. It was reported, I think Amazon was reported for $1.3 billion a year. So it's a massive spike from what everyone started in 2016.
Yeah.
I think that when you have less resources than all the other players out there, whether it be Amazon or YouTube or Facebook or any of the other platforms out there, you start getting really, really creative and scrappy about what are the gaps in our industry. And so for me, it was always, how do we complement linear television without actively cannibalizing it? We see a generational shift when it comes to consumption of media or of sports. You have the older generation that are still consuming live long form that's optimized for linear television. Right. And then you have the younger generation that are just purely consuming highlights and clips. I like to call them the House of Highlights or overtime generation, right? This generation are prolific consumers of media, but it's different. It's mobile first. It's short format. And it's really optimized for the social platforms, whether it be Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, or TikTok, right? And so when you as a rights holder are thinking about the future, your most valuable IP is live sports. And yet your future generation is really not optimized for linear television, right? And so it got me thinking a little bit about how do I help rights holders and IP holders really kind of invest in the future without actively, for lack of a better term, cannibalizing today. And so, yeah, it's additive, it's incremental. How do we complement? How do we advance the industry? And how do we make the ecosystem healthier? So that was kind of the genesis of Buzzer, the product. In terms of making the leap, it was by far one of the hardest things I've done professionally and personally. It took me about 7 months to really muster the courage to actually make that leap. So I left April of 2019, and then I spent the rest of the year prototyping Buzzer. But during that process, I liquidated my 401k.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And because I wanted to go all in, I wanted to look at every investor in the eye, as well as every teammate in the eye, and communicate, I'm all in. There's no alternative. There's no plan B. This is it. Secondly is I started to realize how much Twitter had defined me and who I was and how incredible of a platform it afforded. When you leave, that is all gone.
Yeah. People don't know Bo at Buzzer. They know Bo at Twitter.
Yeah. And then you get hypersensitive about things.
Emails take longer to get replied to.
Yeah, emails take longer. Some text messages take a few days, and every little thing you just internalize.
Yeah.
Because Bo with a non-Twitter email has a little bit less urgency.
Yeah.
But I'm so incredibly grateful for that year of growth, because it really kind of set up how we are to intentionally and thoughtfully build this company, as well as the product and our culture. But yeah, it was incredibly, in my mind, a dark period for me, the rest of 2019. And until I probably made my first hire in March of 2020.
And so how did you convince that first hire, right? So you're pre-investment, no seed money except for the 401k that you just divested. What did you say to that potential employee that got them excited about joining?
Actually, I hired the first full-time employee after we were funded.
Oh,
so
okay.
That's another story in itself.
I'd love to hear that. Yeah.
Yeah, I just had a prototype in my phone,
Oh, cool.
and through a mutual friend found an incredible engineer who also had an incredible product and design mind, Dominique, and he is one of my just closest friends. He's an advisor for Buzzer. We found each other through a mutual friend at Twitter. They had gone to business school together, and we just showed up to the WeWork every day, and he built the first prototype. But essentially, in the investor meeting, it was just me and my phone, showing this prototype. To be quite honest, I was very free about sharing my idea, because in the back of my mind, the biggest barrier to this business is license.
Yeah.
The biggest strategic moat to this business is license. So in my mind, I was pretty open about the concept of Buzzer, and it was very validating. To your earlier question, when did you think that this idea worked? Well, when I explained this to my 62-year-old Korean mother who lives in Seoul, Korea, and I showed her the prototype, she said, "This makes sense." And I'm like, finally. I worked 5 years at Microsoft, which we worked together at Microsoft, and 7 years at Twitter. And for those 12, 13 years, I've tried to explain to my parents what I did, and they would never understand what I did. And then when I finally showed them a prototype of the product, they're like, "Yeah, I get this. This is so simple."
That's awesome.
So at 35 years old, I was like, I've arrived. My parents get Buzzer. But I was very fortunate enough to meet Lair Hippo, Kenny Lair, and Isabel, Isabel Phelps, who recently got promoted to partner. They just named 4 female partners. Axios reported that yesterday. But I went into that room, and Kenny Lair, who was back then involved with the Mets, looked at the product, and he got it. And 2 days later, I was sent a term sheet.
Wow.
Which is just crazy. And
that's not usual, right? That fast?
No, it's not. Not at all. Not at all. And
yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. It's for me, it's just kind of, to your point, pausing and appreciating these moments. I don't do it enough. But yeah, I had a term sheet in hand, didn't sign it. And then I went to Chicago for the NBA All-Star. Keep in mind, this is right before the pandemic is, full blown.
It's like 3 weeks before.
Yeah. And so I'm in Chicago, and I meet with Michael Spirito and Doug Higgins from Sapphire Sport, part of the Sapphire Ventures family. And I showed them the prototype. And that moment, they offered me a term sheet as well, which I politely declined because I had given Kenny my word that I was going to figure something out with it. And the next day, Michael called and said, "Hey, you do know that it's par for the course to compare term sheets." And, for me, it's, this is the start, and I want to stay true to my word. And long story short, we figured out a way for both of them to co-lead the round.
Fantastic.
And it just built so much goodwill with my investment partners. And we've been able to kind of connect in a very much values-driven way. I say that because once we closed the round, we announced it later in the fall, but we actually closed the round in early spring of last year. And I felt very conflicted as the pandemic shut down everything, and people started to get laid off, and we were entering an economic crisis on top of a global health crisis, on top of a social and racial reckoning in this country, right? And so all of this was just a perfect storm, and I was sitting on a $4 million term sheet. And so for me, it was more about how do I use this in an intentional, thoughtful, and purposeful way. And one is I offered to give back the investment. I wrote a week before closing, I wrote a blank BCC'd email, a mass email to all our committed investors. And I said, "Hey, I know that some of your portfolios may look very different from what it was 2 or 3 weeks ago when you committed. No hard feelings if you have to back out or downsize your investment." I started to get some calls of, "What are you doing? You're supposed to close the round, not to give money back. We've never heard of this," where people where the founders, offering to give money back. And then a handful of others were, "Is this a trick? Are you oversubscribed and you want to downsize me?" And I'm like, "No, I'm really trying to do the right thing."
Yeah.
Right. And so, we only saw a $25,000 drop. Everyone, kind of reached out and said, "If anyone drops, top us off, scale us up." So that was the one kind of intentional decision I made personally very early on.
That's awesome.
The second, to your hiring question, is I made an intentional decision to only hire people who have been either laid off or furloughed due to the pandemic. That's the only way that I could really justify raising $4 million during the pandemic. And so Melissa was my first hire, and she's our director of operations, probably one of the best people I've ever worked with professionally. She had stints at Uber, a consulting firm, and then right before joining us was at a pet startup. But I found her on a spreadsheet of the list of people who've gotten laid off.
Yeah.
And so
I remember that spreadsheet. Okay.
Yeah. So she got laid off on Thursday. I found that spreadsheet on Sunday. I scheduled a meeting on Monday, offered her a job on Wednesday.
Amazing.
And so she jokes around about, you didn't even give me a week to mope, And I'm like, there's no time for moping, So that's kind of our story of hiring our first teammate.
That's phenomenal, man. And, that's very rare in this industry of having kind of that moral compass on so many fronts in terms of, respecting the people that are providing you revenue to get the company going, respecting the fact that people are out there. I know, because I've known you for a real long time, that faith is important in your life, and you don't hide it, which I really respect, especially in a very cynical, cutthroat industry, somebody to kind of openly share their faith. Can you talk a little bit about how faith shapes your life and shapes the decisions that you make and is a foundation for your company?
I'm a son of a preacher man. There's a song about it, right? And my dad has always made it clear, though, is that despite of him being a pastor, my faith is something personal, and it's a personal relationship. I say follower of Christ because I think, unfortunately, religion has been weaponized in this country, where it is used to divide, to exclude. I will say I was never always vocal about my faith. I think I really turned it up in the last 5 years because I just couldn't sit and see and listen to my faith that I hold beloved used very differently in this country. And so I'm very deliberate saying follow Christ because for me, it's all about how do I emulate and project qualities that I read in the Bible, and it is about being loving and accepting and being kind, empathetic, and passionate. And I really love this whole notion of being a steward leader. You lead by serving.
Absolutely.
And you being the last person to eat. You being the last person to be paid, right? Because unless you have that mentality, your teammates are not going to serve each other. And the one incredible thing I've seen in my team is everyone serves one another. And it's just such a beautiful and incredible thing to see. And I know that I need to do that first. I need to lead by example. And my ultimate goal is, especially in our tech industry, is create a new paradigm and a blueprint that you can be kind, you can be compassionate, you can be empathetic, and also you can do well.
Yeah.
You can get the funding that you want. You can get the valuation you want. You can get the partnerships that you want because you're leading in a way that's very different. And you know what? We hire incredibly well because of it, because people want to be part of it. And I think now more than ever, it is so important for us to lead that way. I mentioned a social and racial reckoning. Humility aside, I feel that I was born to start a company now because it is so important, especially during a crisis, especially during these important racial and social conversations that are happening in our country, that you lead in a moral way. And I find no greater purpose than creating a company, fostering a culture, and building a product that leans into those values of, how do we instill community? Because at the end of the day, Buzzer is a community product. What we're doing is utilizing data to identify moments to bring people together, right? It's a community product. Yeah. Sports is a community product. And so if we do not embody community within our values, within our team, within our culture, then I don't care what incredible product you put out, it's going to ring untrue.
Totally.
Right? And so it's incredibly important to build in a very meaningful and purposeful way now.
I love that so much. And it's, the few people that I know that are on your team that I've worked with in the past, they're not only great at their jobs, hired some of the best, but more importantly, they're great human beings. Mm-hmm. They're great at being human.
Absolutely.
And I just, as you started to build your team, I've been so enamored with that you're hiring good people in good roles. If you have time for 2 more questions, is that cool?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. So watching the video with you this morning and the just horrific violence that's happening in the Asian American community, it's sickening and it's obviously undeserved. I would love to hear how that has impacted you as an Asian American entrepreneur, but as somebody that's in the community. I think one of the things you talked about in that video was how close-knit the community is to their elders. And I'd love to hear a little bit about the relationship that you have with your family and the relationship that's happening now in the community because of this violence.
Yeah, it's incredibly personal for me because when I heard that 4 Korean moms got gunned down, I just couldn't help but to think about my own.
Yeah.
My mother is someone who is selfless. She's essentially sacrificed everything. She essentially came to the country with my dad to finish out a master's and PhD program and essentially set that aside to raise us. And, my dad, we all moved back to Korea when I was 12, but I needed to come back to the States to finish out schooling. And my mom moved with my sister. And the 3 of us lived in Chicago, in the north side of Chicago. When people say, hey, you moved to New Trier, they all automatically think you're affluent. And I'm like, no. We found a second floor of a house that had a backdoor entrance. And my mom made it work. Despite of having all of her professional degrees, she worked at a library collecting $9 an hour stacking books at the neighborhood library just to make things work for us, right? And for me, those are the 4 women that were representative in the day spa are people that would just drop everything for their kids, collect a minimum wage check just to make things work for their kids. And so it hit really incredibly hard and personal for me. I also am reminded that I am human. I bring these emotions, these feelings, this rage, this sadness, this anger to work. And what I've been very vocal about with our team, whether you see another police murder or brutality or the Capitol attacks, I'm constantly reminding our team that we are not productivity machines, and we feel and we emote. And it is really important during these times to give your teammates the grace to process that, to give them the space and just the assurance saying, hey, I'm feeling that too. And also it's okay to feel unproductive today. It's okay to feel distracted today because that's what makes you human, right? And so to open up, the conversation more, I know that there's a lot of conversation around this political discussions that belong at the workplace. And my answer to that is we live in an unfortunate society where Black Lives Matter or Stop Asian Hate are political statements.
Right. Like
when they should be simple declaration. Yeah, those are simple declaration of humanity, right? And so my answer to that is until that stops being a political statement where Black Lives Matter or Stop Asian Hate, Stop Trans Hate, when that stops being a political conversation and a human conversation, we're still going to talk about politics in the office because the fact of the matter is that people can't check their skin color, their identity at the door when they show up to work.
Right.
And I think it's incredibly important now because you see the convergence of the professional and personal world where people are physically working at home, right? And so I think it's very important for us to foster a space and environment where we're incredibly nurturing and compassionate and empathetic towards everyone. And I will kind of leave this question with one more thing is when the Capitol attacks happened, I called a team meeting and we have a team of 40 now, but back then we had 31. And I said, look around the virtual room. We all look different. We're all from different backgrounds, different ethnicity, cultures. That attack, which is a singular event, hit us in 31 different ways.
Wow.
And we processed it 31 different, and I said, for some, this is the least shocking thing in the world. For some, it is,
right.
Another day. It's Wednesday. For me as a leader is how do I bridge that gap using empathy and understanding for one another, right? And so it's incredibly challenging to provide 31 solutions for 31 different folks. But sometimes it's not about being the solution. It's about creating a space where people can learn and be empathetic to one another and really understand. Honestly, it's not two Americas. It's the one America that we all live in. We just happen to have experienced America in 31 different ways. And so it's just incredibly important to just acknowledge that, really see that.
Thank you for saying that. And I love the way that you're leading this team because, a lot of times people say it gets really lonely at the top, right? As you kind of rise to the ranks, there's less people to confide in. There's less people to talk to about the problems that you have. But you have created an open space that's very inclusive of that. And that's amazing.
Yeah, it's not lonely at all.
Yeah.
I mean, because I let them in. It's like if you're vulnerable and you're open, it really isn't lonely. And isn't that what it's supposed to be, right? That technology, but also social platforms, aren't we supposed to use it in a way that we make other people feel less lonely? Like Keith, I will tell you how many DMs I've gotten in the last 24 hours especially from younger Asian Americans, that say, thank you for making me feel less lonely. That someone like you feels that way. I'm like, of course, I look like you, we live in the same country, and so for me, it is how do we make each other feel less lonely through collective shared experiences? I think that's incredibly important.
It's incredibly important, incredibly powerful. One last one here. So through the pandemic, you just raised the money, you just started hiring, you just started going this thing, and you're off to the races where most people are spending 90, 100 hours a week building their product. You also decide to start a mentorship program called Strive. Where did you find the time? And walk me through why this was important right off the bat when you started Buzzer.
Absolutely. I love saying this, and it's true. Buzzer's first product was Strive.
Cool.
It had nothing to do with sports,
Yeah.
And the way Strive came about was days after George Floyd's murder. I started to think about how do we address this multifaceted nature of injustice in this country. And what I started to realize is, yes, injustice, hate, intolerance comes in many forms. One is what's captured on video that we often see, on social channels, on Twitter. But second is injustice sometimes comes in the form of unseen access.
Absolutely.
To internship opportunities, job opportunities, mentorship opportunities, just relationships, right? And so for me personally, I started to think about how do we use Buzzer as a platform to bridge that gap, to level the uneven playing field. So I think shortly after I sent out a tweet that said, if you are a college student and you lost your internship, summer internship due to the pandemic, DM me. If you go to an HBCU, please DM me. I put a little emphasis on the second. I woke up the next day with 500 DMs and resumes.
Wow,
and I was like, oh, that tweet took off, and then I was just digging out of my DMs, right? And from that, we hired 3 now what we call Strive Fellows. This year, we'll have 4 Strive Fellows that are Black college students, also college students of color that traditionally have come from HBCUs, but also other universities. And for the rest, I was like, man, I can't send rejection letters.
Yeah.
And so what we flipped it into is a summer mentorship program. And so I sent it to you, as well as, a few other friends in the industry, whether they be leagues and networks at Nike, at Jordan, at Coke. And that Google Doc got passed around to a point where I was like, okay, now this is the most comprehensive CRM for very influential individuals in this industry. So I had to lock, at a certain point, I had to lock the Google Doc. I was like, okay, this is emails right here, And so, but within 3 days, I had 600 mentors. I actually ended up getting more mentors than mentees, and this all happened in the course of a week. And so phenomenal. We facilitated a 500 mentor-mentee program called Strive. And to see, I will say a year later, and we're doing the second year of Strive this summer, internship opportunities, job opportunities. I've just heard so many success stories. And all we were is just the connector. We didn't do anything. We just connected people, right? And allowed the mentors and mentees to forge those relationships. And sometimes that's all it takes for you to be the connector, right?
Yeah.
And
to build that structure, build that bridge, and say, hey, you two want to meet, here you go.
Absolutely. And, I had a college student who was a junior at Morehouse, and one of the questions for the Strive mentee application was, what's your dream job? And that student wrote, I want to be GM of a baseball team someday. I'm like, great. One of my good friends is GM of the San Francisco Giants. Here you go. Right.
Amazing.
And my buddy called me. He was like, hey, did you tell anyone that what I did? I was like, no, I wanted him to figure it out, and the mentee was just in disbelief.
Yeah.
And to kind of put a nice little bow to it, he's interning for the Atlanta Braves for the GM. Right.
That's
and
fantastic.
So Morehouse student,
That's so
local
cool,
team, now he's interning for the Braves. How incredibly heartwarming is that?
Yeah. That's amazing, man. Bo, thank you so much. This has been so fantastic talking to you. Again, the product is something I'm so bullish on. I'm excited. I'm a user. I'm a fan, and I can't wait to see it continuing to grow. But I'm also a fan of you, and honored to be your friend.
Thank you.
And honored to know somebody like you who really does that leadership from a service background. It's really, really cool.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
I lied. One last question. How big does Buzzer get? Is it a global phenomenon? Where do you see this going?
Yeah, it is a global phenomenon because sports is incredibly social, right? Keith, like if you're watching a very exciting Mets game where Jacob deGrom is pitching lights out, you're going to tell someone about it.
Yeah.
Right. And so how do we tap into that habit of you already, that built-in habit of you telling someone? Right. And so that's why I opened up with how we are the last mile technology for connecting these live and ephemeral moments to fans, but also we become that last mile tech for you and your friends, where if your friends are not watching the Met game, how can we equip you with the relevant live link in a very short, barrier-free way to share with your folks, right? And so I do believe that the future of distribution is peer-to-peer, and decentralized. And so how do we really tap into that existing human behavior that we already have? So I do believe that is a global phenomenon. That's a global behavior, right? And so that's what I'm really excited about the future. Because if we really do perfect that last mile, there's a lot of venues that we can, and extensions that we can take this to, right? And so
start getting into the soccer and cricket and all the other.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not even talking about sports, but I'm also talking about, let's talk about merchandising. Let's talk about NFTs. Let's talk about collectibles. There's ticketing, right? There's just so many natural extensions if we can really figure this last mile tech out.
Awesome, man. Bo, thank you so much. It was great talking with you.
Absolutely.
It was awesome.